300,000 years prior, an enigmatic human species flourished in conditions so inhospitable that contemporary humans could not endure a single winter there. They deliberately produced fire, hunted cave bears, adorned themselves with jewelry, and possibly decorated cave walls. These were Neanderthals, and almost everything you thought you knew about them is almost certainly incorrect. Throughout history, Neanderthals were portrayed as dim-witted cave dwellers, aimlessly roaming across Europe, awaiting their own extinction. The primitive caveman image suggested creatures that shuffled through snow on their knuckles, incapable of discovering even basic warmth strategies. Yet recent archaeological breakthroughs have demolished this notion entirely. In late 2025, researchers confirmed a discovery that fundamentally reshapes our understanding of ancient human cognition. Neanderthals deliberately created fire 400,000 years ago. I recognize your initial thought. Producing fire seems hardly remarkable. Everyone has seen survival programs featuring someone rubbing two sticks together. But let me explain why this discovery carries tremendous significance. Findings from Barnum in eastern England reveal that Neanderthals did not simply use fire from natural sources like lightning strikes. They intentionally sparked flames through a method demanding strategy, knowledge, and technical skill. Archaeologists uncovered fragments of iron pyrite at the site. This lustrous mineral, sometimes called fool's gold, produces sparks when struck with flint, capable of igniting dry tinder and building a blaze. Neanderthals from Barnum understood this principle 400,000 years prior, 350,000 years before any other documented evidence of deliberate fire-making anywhere globally. One research director called the discovery the most remarkable finding throughout his 40-year career. Honestly, even that assessment probably understates it. Yet fire represented merely the initial adaptation, enabling Neanderthals to conquer the Ice Age. Flame alone provided insufficient protection from freezing. They required clothing. And this narrative becomes truly fascinating. Visualize this scenario. Approximately 320,000 years ago, across present-day Germany, a Neanderthal group had just killed a cave bear. These were not the gentle furred creatures one encounters in zoos. Cave bears were enormous, sometimes exceeding 10 feet in length and outweighing any modern bear species. Subduing such a creature demanded extraordinary coordination, bravery, and genuinely formidable weaponry. Yet researchers discovered something unexpected. Examining bear remains from the Schöningen archaeological site in Germany, they found something astonishing. Cut marks appeared not where expected from standard butchering, but concentrated on the bear's limbs, areas containing minimal meat. Why would Neanderthals invest time meticulously cutting hides around bear paws if they had no intention of consuming them? The explanation lies with fur. Those refined, accurate incisions indicate careful hide removal. Neanderthals extracted pelts from these colossal creatures and wrapped themselves against the merciless winters of northern Europe. Consider what this signifies. Removing a bear pelt must occur rapidly following death, otherwise hair begins shedding and the hide becomes useless. Therefore, Neanderthals were not simply scavenging random carcasses, they actively hunted adult bears and immediately butchered them. This required forethought and expertise, a cognitive level that scientists had refused acknowledging in Neanderthals for over a century. According to researchers, leveraging bear hides probably became the crucial adaptation allowing these ancient people to endure the frozen north. Without insulating fur, the cold would have proven unbearable. Winter bear coats feature dual layers, extended guard hairs establishing an air-insulating protective zone, plus dense underfur that preserves warmth excellently. Essentially, nature created ideal cold-weather apparel, and Neanderthals mastered its use. Yet this was not everything. The Schöningen site yielded not simply evidence of bearskin clothing, but something remarkably more extraordinary. The oldest completely preserved wooden weapons ever recovered anywhere on Earth. Within waterlogged sediment at this ancient hunting ground beside a lake lay 10 wooden spears hundreds of thousands of years old. These were not merely sharpened sticks. They were meticulously manufactured, precise weapons crafted by individuals comprehending wood properties and understanding exactly how to shape materials for maximum effectiveness. Most spears came from spruce, one from pine. They ranged approximately from 6 feet down to slightly over 8 feet long. Craftspeople selected slender, straight trunks, stripped their bark, and transformed them into lethal hunting instruments. Each spear's balance point sat roughly 1/3 from its tip, identical to modern athletic javelins. This could not represent coincidence. This was genuine engineering. For decades, scientists placed these spears at approximately 400,000 years old, suggesting earlier human ancestors created them. Yet in 2025, researchers employed novel dating techniques, examining amino acids persisting in fossilized snail shells from the same deposit layer containing the spears. Results indicated substantially more recent ages, around 200,000 years. This changes everything, because 200,000 years back clearly places these artifacts within Neanderthal timeframes. The ramifications prove enormous. These were not primitive scavengers consuming remains abandoned by other predators. The Neanderthals manufacturing these weapons were accomplished hunters, eliminating Europe's most dangerous animals, woolly rhinoceroses, ancient horses, reindeer, and cave bears during Ice Age conditions. Evidence demonstrates they hunted through coordinated groups, executed ambushes against entire herds, and processed kill sites with remarkable proficiency. One researcher stated it this way: achieving regular hunting success meant expeditions required total cooperation, depending on teamwork and shared objectives. Essentially, Neanderthals functioned as unified teams, communicating, strategizing, and executing complex group tactics. This necessitates language, or something remarkably similar. This aspect particularly fascinates me. Scientists debated whether Neanderthals possessed speech capacity. Some researchers argued their vocal apparatus structure prevented articulate language. Others referenced their isolated existence, proposing advanced communication was simply unnecessary. But archaeological evidence narrates an entirely different account. Coordinating group hunts against wild horse herds becomes impossible without explaining plans to companions. Teaching someone to select appropriate wood, fashion a spear, and properly balance it requires sharing detailed information. Maintaining traditions across millennia among separated populations demands some cultural knowledge transmission mechanism. Neanderthals were not merely surviving. They established civilization, culture, and lifeways persisting hundreds of thousands of years across vast territories extending from the Atlantic coast to Central Asia. Since we are discussing culture, I must describe a discovery that profoundly moved me upon learning about it: eagle claw adornments. At the Krapina site in Croatia, archaeologists recovered 8 talons from white-tailed eagles that Neanderthals processed roughly 130,000 years prior. Remaining evidence showed cut marks at detachment points, plus polishing and wear traces resulting from the claws strung together and rubbing against each other. Several possessed small perforations created precisely identically, indicating they fastened within a single ornamental piece. This was not a lone claw worn as simple jewelry, but rather an intricate necklace or bracelet comprising multiple eagle talons gathered throughout time from minimally 3 or 4 different birds. Neanderthals hunted these massive eagles, employed precise implements to remove their talons, and assembled them into wearable ornaments. Why did they require this? What survival advantage could eagle claw jewelry provide? Obviously none. This represented symbolic action, personal decoration, and expression of group belonging, status, or membership. Identical reasons modern people wear jewelry presently. And this renders the discovery even more remarkable. It preceded modern humans arriving in Europe by tens of thousands of years. Neanderthals did not acquire this from us. They developed it entirely autonomously. 30 years ago, scientists believed symbolic behavior belonged exclusively to Homo sapiens. Neanderthals seemed fundamentally different beings, incapable of artistic or abstract reasoning, perhaps intelligent animals, yet not truly human. Now we possess numerous minor evidences combining into a radically altered picture. Eagle claw jewelry, body decoration using red ochre, possible cave paintings, and ceremonial burials. Neanderthals resembled us far more closely than anyone previously imagined. But if they were so intelligent, so capable, so excellently adapted to their surroundings, why did they disappear? Why did they vanish around 40,000 years ago whilst we persisted and colonized the planet? This question troubled scientists for decades, and the answers they discovered simultaneously captivate and unsettle. Neanderthal extinction resulted from intertwined elements: climatic catastrophe, resource competition, and something darker. Something more sinister that researchers confirmed in late 2025, evidence of cannibalism, specifically selective and directed against outsiders. But before exploring this, understanding what rendered Neanderthals so remarkably adapted to Ice Age survival becomes essential. Because their physiology differed profoundly from ours, they were constructed differently. Hundreds of thousands of years of evolution literally shaped their bodies for enduring Earth's harshest cold conditions. Comprehending their biological architecture explains everything else, their existence, and ultimately their demise. The Neanderthal body represented a masterpiece of cold adaptation. Stocky, robust limbs, barrel-shaped chest, enormous nose, every trait served purpose. Every feature supported survival where unprotected modern humans would perish within hours. Scientists term this physiology hyperarctic, and Neanderthals perfected it long before Ice Age conditions reached maximum severity. Picture this distinction. Contemporary humans originated in Africa, where the primary thermal challenge involved preventing overheating rather than staying warm. Our bodies excel at releasing heat, elongated limbs, slender frames. Essentially, we resemble heat radiators on 2 legs. Neanderthals represented complete opposites. They evolved across Europe during some of recent geologic history's coldest intervals. Their bodies transformed into compact, heat-conserving machines. Behind this lies established scientific principle known as Bergmann's rule. According to it, animals inhabiting cold climates typically develop larger body mass and proportionally shorter limbs, minimizing surface exposure to cold air. Neanderthals embodied this principle perfectly. Their arms and legs were proportionally shorter than ours, their torsos wider and deeper. Текст готов. Все рекламные вставки удалены. Рекламный контент полностью переписан и переведен на английский с сохранением смысла, структуры, образности и стиля живой речи. When you look at the ratio between body volume and surface area, Neanderthals would have held a significant advantage over modern humans when it came to retaining heat. However, their thermal superiority went far beyond simple body proportions. Their facial structure itself represented an elegant adaptation to glacial conditions. Those large nasal passages that early researchers dismissed as a mark of primitive brutishness were actually a masterpiece of biological engineering. The expanded nasal cavities warmed and humidified frigid air before it reached the lungs. Breathing extremely cold, dry air directly into your respiratory system can cause serious damage. The Neanderthal nose solved this problem beautifully. Meanwhile, enlarged suborbital apertures, the openings in the cheekbones through which blood vessels pass, increased blood flow to the face, helping the skin retain warmth in freezing temperatures. Even their prominent brow ridges likely protected their eyes from the glare bouncing off snow and ice. Every feature of the classic Neanderthal face served a specific function. What early anthropologists interpreted as crudeness was actually sophisticated environmental adaptation. Equally remarkable was their metabolic system. Neanderthals burned calories at an extraordinary rate. Scientists estimate that an adult male needed between 4,500 and 6,750 calories daily just to maintain body weight. This doubled the typical caloric requirements of modern humans. Even compared to contemporary hunter-gatherers, their numbers were extreme. This intense metabolism was necessary because their bodies essentially functioned as internal furnaces around the clock. Maintaining heat when temperatures plummeted below zero, carrying muscular, compact frames across difficult terrain, and pursuing massive megafauna required tremendous energy expenditure. This raises the crucial question of nutrition. How did they acquire sufficient calories? The answer was straightforward. Meat. Enormous quantities of meat. Isotopic analysis of Neanderthal bones reveals they obtained 80 to 90% of their protein from animal sources. In terms of trophic positioning, this placed them alongside wolves and hyenas. They were apex predators sitting at the top of the food pyramid. Their diet encompassed everything from mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses to ancient horses. Bone accumulations at Neanderthal sites, butchered horse remains, reindeer, bison, and even individual mammoth skeletons testify to this. These were not scavengers collecting leftovers from other kills. These were hunters who actively pursued and killed the largest and most dangerous animals in their world. This required the weapons we discussed earlier. Wooden spears, sophisticated hunting methods, and coordinated group activity, all indicating language, foresight, and social structures far more advanced than what anyone expected from a supposedly primitive species competing with modern humans. Yet here comes an unexpected twist. The very adaptations that enabled Neanderthals to thrive during Ice Age conditions may have simultaneously set the stage for their downfall. Extreme specialization to one specific environment becomes perilous when that environment starts shifting. And it shifted repeatedly, sometimes so dramatically that even the most specialized species struggled to adapt. Most people misunderstand one fundamental aspect of the Ice Age. It was not a single, endless frozen period. Climate during Neanderthal times was remarkably volatile. Frozen wastelands alternated with stretches so warm that hippopotamuses swam in the Thames. Actual hippopotamuses in England. Take a moment to absorb that reality. The past 800,000 years of Earth's history were dominated by enormous cycles. During glaciations, ice sheets moved south from the Arctic, blanketing much of northern Europe. Then came interglacials. The ice retreated, temperatures rose again. This pattern repeated endlessly. Sometimes the transition unfolded gradually across millennia. Other times, climate shifted abruptly within just a few generations. Neanderthals survived all of this. Picture what it meant to live in such a world. Your grandparents told stories of hunting reindeer across frozen tundra. Now the glaciers retreat and forests creep northward. Animals your people hunted for countless generations follow the cold away. New species appear. The entire world your ancestors knew transforms right around you. This scenario repeated many times throughout Neanderthal history. Yet each time they adapted and continued surviving. For more than 300,000 years, they endured these climatic roller coasters better than almost any large mammal on Earth. But how? How does a population survive when the entire environment flips upside down every few thousand years? The answer involves what researchers call the refuge strategy. During the harshest glacial periods, when ice sheets penetrated deep into Europe and temperatures dropped so low that modern-day Siberia would seem temperate, Neanderthals did not attempt to cling to the frozen north at any cost. Instead, they retreated to warmer Mediterranean regions, the Iberian Peninsula, southern France, Italy, and the Balkans. Even at the peak of the most severe glaciations, these territories maintained relatively mild climates. As temperatures warmed again, Neanderthals moved back northward, following the retreating ice and the animal herds that accompanied the thaw. This was their rhythm, a kind of millennia-long dance, southward as cold intensified, northward as it weakened. Generation after generation, people memorized the routes, timing, and skills necessary for survival in each environment. Now things get genuinely interesting. For a long time, scientists believed that during glaciations, Neanderthals barely hung on, struggling through barely survivable Mediterranean refuges while waiting for better times. Cold periods seemed like bottlenecks in their population history, moments when numbers crashed dramatically and survival became desperate struggle. But a discovery in Spain, published in 2024, completely rewrote this narrative. In the rock shelter known as Abri Pissarra, nestled in the Catalonian mountains, archaeologists uncovered evidence of Neanderthal occupation during one of the most savage cold episodes of the entire Ice Age, the marine isotope stage 4, roughly 70 to 60,000 years ago. This was brutal, unrelenting cold. Glaciers pushed southward, temperatures plummeted, and most of Europe became inhospitable. What did researchers find at this site? Evidence of Neanderthals desperately clinging to existence? Absolutely not. Archaeologists discovered over 29,000 artifacts, stone tools, butchered animal bones, and proof of repeated, extended habitation. The Neanderthals of Abri Pissarra were not miserably surviving, they were thriving. They hunted both large prey like horses and deer, and small game, including rabbits and birds, applying skill and efficiency to exploit every available food source. One lead researcher noted that the findings demonstrate behavioral flexibility and adaptive capacity that allowed them to manage extreme climate while maintaining their established way of life without significant disruption. In other words, the cold did not break them. They continued doing what they knew: hunting, processing hides, crafting tools, and living their lives. The shelter sat amid evergreen oaks and Mediterranean vegetation, a comparatively temperate pocket surrounded by frozen wastes. Neanderthals understood precisely how to leverage its resources. This is what 300,000 years of evolution and accumulated cultural knowledge produced. They had endured so many climatic upheavals that they essentially compiled an encyclopedia of Ice Age survival. When cold arrived, they knew where to go, what to hunt, and how to adjust their approach based on what the land provided. This knowledge passed down through generations, from parents to children, from elders to youth. Wisdom accumulated regarding landscapes their ancestors had traveled longer than our entire species has existed. Speaking of knowledge transmission, consider one more fact that particularly illuminates how sophisticated these people were. Stone tool production techniques varied by location and specific requirements. In the frozen north, where large prey dominated, Neanderthals favored massive, heavy implements. Thick hand axes and scrapers for processing mammoth hides and cutting through the tough joints of enormous animals. These robust tools were made for demanding work essential to surviving in a landscape of giants. In Mediterranean refuges, the toolkit changed. Lighter, more finely crafted points and blades appeared, better suited for hunting smaller, faster prey. Technology adapted to environment just as people did. Previously, such regional variations puzzled researchers. If Neanderthals operated purely on instinct, following some innate tool-making blueprint, their implements should look identical everywhere. But they do not. Different groups developed distinct techniques, styles, and solutions to local challenges. That is culture. That is learning. That is intelligence applied to real problems across completely different circumstances. Yet differences extended beyond tools. Recent analysis of Neanderthal remains from various regions revealed distinct population groups maintaining relative isolation across millennia, developing their own physical characteristics and likely cultural practices. Some Neanderthals adapted to harsh northern steppes. Sturdy, robustly built communities followed mammoth herds across frozen plains. Elsewhere, on the gentler southern regions, lived different Neanderthals. They differed slightly in build, hunted different prey, and employed somewhat different techniques. This was not a monolithic, uniform population, but a diverse species spread across vast territory, creating localized adaptations and traditions over hundreds of thousands of years. Particularly telling is what genetic comparison of Neanderthals from different periods revealed. The species underwent multiple near-extinction events. Population crashed to dangerously low levels, then recovered, and Neanderthals resettled their former lands. Late-stage Neanderthal genetic diversity was shockingly low, far lower than expected for a species existing so long. This indicates that around 100,000 years ago, some catastrophe occurred. A sudden population collapse nearly eliminated them entirely. Yet they bounced back. They always bounced back. Whatever catastrophe struck, survivors gathered the fragments of their old world and rebuilt, resettled empty territories, and restored ancient migration and hunting routes. Until one day, they could not. I know what you are thinking. If Neanderthals possessed such remarkable endurance, behavioral flexibility, and capacity to survive whatever the Ice Age threw at them, what finally destroyed them? Why are we still here and they are gone? This question has sparked more debate than almost any other topic in human evolution. There is no simple answer. But we do know some things. Roughly 50,000 years ago, everything changed. Our species, Homo sapiens, began leaving Africa and moving toward the Middle East. Over the next 10,000 years, we spread across most of Eurasia. 10,000 years after that, Neanderthals disappeared. Coincidence? Almost certainly not. Evidence points to a period of coexistence when both species occupied identical territories, sometimes literally inhabiting the same cave within just a few generations apart in the geological record. They knew each other. They encountered one another. Genetic data indicates these encounters involved more than just passing meetings. Modern humans with non-African ancestry carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. Our ancestors interbred with Neanderthals not just once, but repeatedly over what appears to have been an extended period spanning thousands of years. Many researchers believe the primary wave of mixing occurred approximately 47,000 years ago and persisted for around 7,000 years. These were not isolated incidents or chance encounters. Rather, they represented sustained contact between two distinct yet seemingly compatible human species. The offspring of these unions survived and passed their hybrid heritage forward to subsequent generations. Neanderthal genes became dispersed throughout the expanding human population and persist within us today. But what exactly did we inherit from them? What Neanderthal legacy currently resides hidden in your DNA? The answer is surprisingly substantial. We carry genes affecting immune function, variants influencing skin and hair characteristics, and genetic material that may have helped our ancestors adapt to colder, darker northern climates. Certain researchers propose that Neanderthal genes enabled ancient Europeans to withstand diseases to which they had previously had no exposure. However, not all of this inherited material proved beneficial. Some Neanderthal variants are associated with increased susceptibility to certain conditions, depression, blood clotting disorders, and various skin diseases. The interbreeding represented neither an unqualified success for us nor for them. Although interbreeding, cultural exchange, and whatever relationships existed between the two species occurred, Neanderthals nevertheless disappeared. Some scholars attribute their extinction primarily to population dynamics. Homo sapiens simply outnumbered them and expanded more rapidly. We displaced them not through innate superiority, but rather through overwhelming demographic pressure. The more people requiring sustenance, the greater strain fell on the same hunting territories. Combined with increasingly unstable climate conditions, competing populations, and dwindling resources, these factors may have ultimately tipped the balance. Others hypothesize that we brought pathogens that devastated Neanderthal populations. Our ancestors' African origins had exposed them to microorganisms against which Neanderthal immune systems had developed no defenses. Millennia later, history would repeat itself when Europeans arrived in the Americas. A third explanation involves violence. Our ancestors may have deliberately hunted and killed Neanderthals. Wars between species, continental-scale genocide. Direct evidence for this theory remains elusive. No mass graves of Neanderthals bearing marks of modern human weapons have been discovered. Yet the absence of evidence does not prove the absence of events, especially concerning occurrences 40,000 years in the past. However, indirect indicators of conflict do exist, along with a deeply troubling discovery that deserves particular attention: cannibalism. In late 2025, researchers published an analysis of Neanderthal bones excavated from a Belgian cave. The remains belonged to 6 individuals, 4 adult females and 2 children, estimated between 41 and 45,000 years old. This marked the very end of the Neanderthal era. The bones displayed unmistakable butchering marks. The patterns matched the cutting away of flesh. Fractures indicated the extraction of bone marrow, and the damage patterns perfectly corresponded to those found on animal bones from the same site. These people had been consumed. Yet the truly disturbing element lay elsewhere. Chemical analysis revealed they were not local. They had traveled from elsewhere and were outsiders on foreign territory. Researchers concluded this was not survival cannibalism, not desperate acts during famine. Individuals from other groups were deliberately killed and eaten, treated as prey. Perhaps Neanderthals were responding to pressure from advancing modern humans, or their groups began attacking one another as resources diminished and territories contracted. Could the cooperation they once knew have dissolved alongside the world they understood? We lack definitive answers. Bones cannot reveal the thoughts of those who consumed their own kind. Yet the timing of these events is suggestive. This occurred at the very end, when everything was already collapsing. Neanderthals, having survived ice ages, climate fluctuations, and 300,000 years of countless trials, finally encountered challenges they could not overcome. In their final millennia, desperation spawned something dark. Yet even in disappearing, they left us a gift. Their genes became part of our ancestors' inheritance, and in a genuine sense, Neanderthals never completely vanished. They live within us, in our immune systems, our skin, and in the very foundation of what our species is. Every person whose ancestry extends beyond Africa carries a fragment of Neanderthal heritage, a minute piece of the species that conquered the Ice Age, yet was absorbed by history's march. Remarkably, a substantial portion of this inheritance proved useful. Once researchers precisely identified which Neanderthal genes persisted in contemporary populations, it became evident this was no accident. Among these genes were an unusually high proportion that aided survival in cold northern climates. Some influenced fat metabolism and temperature regulation, while others affected immune responses to specific pathogens. Natural selection preserved beneficial Neanderthal variants while gradually eliminating harmful ones. Our ancestors essentially tried on foreign genes and retained only those that suited them. Several of these variants today occur with remarkable frequency in particular populations. Variants affecting skin pigmentation and hair structure that originated in Neanderthals appear in most Europeans and Asians. We literally wear Neanderthal heritage on our own skin. Other genes function with greater complexity. Certain variants linked to blood clotting probably helped our ancestors survive wounds, but today may increase stroke risk. Some affect mood and pain sensitivity, as well as how bodies process medications. Interbreeding was no minor footnote in human evolutionary history. It was a transformative event that shaped us into who we are. We did not descend solely from African humans who left their homeland 50,000 years ago. We are hybrids. Our species and theirs merged, and tens of thousands of years of natural selection refined this fusion. Quite literally, Neanderthals did not go extinct. They merged with us. The expanding human population absorbed them. Their family lines ended, but their genes endured. And this represents just one part of their legacy, something scientists are only now beginning to understand. Evidence suggests Neanderthals resembled us far more than anyone previously imagined. Traces of rituals, beliefs, and contemplation of the same profound questions about life and death that have troubled our species from the beginning. Across Europe, archaeologists discover Neanderthal burials. Bodies were deliberately placed in graves, sometimes in flexed positions resembling sleep. Near them, objects were occasionally left behind: stone tools, animal bones, and possibly offerings for whatever awaited the deceased. For decades, skeptics claimed these were not actual burials, merely bodies randomly buried by sediment and coincidental accumulations of objects. According to them, researchers were simply projecting their wishes, attempting to make Neanderthals seem more human than they actually were. But evidence accumulated. Site after site revealed the same consistent patterns. Bodies had clearly been laid with care. Graves were intentionally dug into cave floors. Stones were deliberately placed above the remains. At Shanidar in Iraq, archaeologists found multiple Neanderthal burials, including a famous instance where an unusually dense accumulation of wildflower pollen was discovered surrounding one body. Had someone scattered flowers on a grave 70,000 years ago? This interpretation remains disputed, yet the mere possibility is captivating. Why bury the dead if death held no meaning? Why break away from constant struggle for survival, dig a hole, and tenderly position a body within it, unless this person mattered to you, unless you believed in something beyond their simple disappearance? We cannot know what Neanderthals believed. Their thoughts were not preserved in written records, but their actions reveal minds grappling with the same mysteries we face. Where do we go after death? Does consciousness simply vanish, or is there something more? Perhaps they held their own answers, rituals, stories, and beliefs that gave life meaning and provided comfort before death. Perhaps around fires they learned to kindle 400,000 years ago, they told stories of ancestors, spirits, and worlds beyond our own. We will never know for certain, yet even this possibility compels us to reconsider what we deemed the defining characteristics of humanity. Now we turn to cave paintings. Here begins a genuinely intense dispute, so heated that scientists practically shout at each other during conferences. If certain researchers are correct, Neanderthals not only cared for their dead and wore ornaments, they painted cave walls tens of thousands of years before modern humans even appeared in Europe. In 2018, a research team announced sensational findings. Using new dating methods, they examined paintings in 3 Spanish caves: La Pasiega, Maltraviesa, and Ordales. Red geometric shapes, handprints, and abstract symbols applied to walls using paint made from ground minerals. Dating indicated an age exceeding 65,000 years. This was 20,000 years earlier than Homo sapiens appeared in Europe. This meant either modern humans arrived far sooner than previously believed, or Neanderthals created the paintings. The research group selected the second explanation. Scientists declared to the world that Neanderthals were cave artists and that our relatives independently developed symbolic expression without influence from us. The reaction was, unsurprisingly, intense. Some researchers embraced the results enthusiastically, viewing them as confirmation of long-held suspicions. Neanderthals possessed complex thinking, possessed the ability for abstraction and creativity, and expressed themselves through art as we do. Others remained unconvinced. They criticized the dating methodology and questioned whether the samples truly represented paint rather than mineral deposits that accumulated later. They also observed that the geometric shapes were relatively simple compared to the intricate animal depictions found in later sites. Perhaps these were merely random marks, not art at all. the debate persists. Every few months, new research appears that either supports the original dates or challenges them. Scientists relish rigorous scientific debate. This controversy has everything required: revolutionary claims, methodological disagreements, and profound questions about what distinguishes humans from all other creatures. Personally, I think this way. Even if these specific dates prove incorrect, the larger picture becomes increasingly clear. Neanderthals exhibited symbolic behavior. Ornaments fashioned from eagle talons demonstrate this, as do traces of pigment found at dozens of sites, careful burials, and flower pollen. All point to minds capable of transcending immediate needs, creating meaning, and expressing belonging. Whether they painted these particular caves remains uncertain, but they definitely did something with pigmented substances. Ochre appears at Neanderthal sites throughout Europe in layers hundreds of thousands of years old. They collected it, processed it, and utilized it for some purpose. Decorating their bodies seems like a plausible explanation. Imagine a Neanderthal preparing for an important event, perhaps a hunt, a ritual, or something we cannot even conceive. He grinds red ochre into powder, mixes it with animal fat, and applies patterns onto his skin meaningful to his people. Patterns saying, "I belong to this place. I am one of you. I am ready." This is how a thoughtful savage behaves, a keeper of culture. Yet culture alone wasn't enough to save them. While Neanderthals lived their lives across Europe, another human species was preparing to transform the world. Around 45,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens finally reached the lands of the Neanderthals, it brought something new.
It wasn't just about superior tools, though they had those, nor was it purely better hunting methods, though that mattered too. The real difference lay in connections between groups. People often overlook this when discussing why we survived and they didn't. It wasn't about intelligence. Neanderthals were remarkably smart. They survived for 300,000 years in conditions that would have destroyed most species, and their average brain size was actually slightly larger than ours. The difference was in society itself, in the ability to maintain relationships across vast distances. When archaeologists study the camps of Homo sapiens from that era, they find extraordinary materials brought from hundreds of kilometers away. Seashells from coastlines appear at camps deep inland. Obsidian from volcanic regions was traded far from where it originated. Decorations and tools were made from materials obtained only through exchange networks that spanned enormous territories. Neanderthal sites show almost nothing like this. Their tools were made from local stone. Their decorations came from nearby surroundings. They lived in small, isolated groups, deeply tied to their territory, but not part of any larger system. It's like the difference between a small town where everyone knows each other and a big city connected by roads and airports to the whole world. In normal times, both systems work fine. But when trouble comes, those connections become everything. You need people to turn to for help. You need resources from places far beyond your immediate land and knowledge from distant regions. Around 40,000 years ago, when climate began changing dramatically, Homo sapiens could adapt because they had choices, trade routes, alliances, and the sharing of knowledge between groups. If one area became uninhabitable, people could move elsewhere or get support from distant relatives. Neanderthals had nothing like that. When their homeland declined, they had nowhere to go and no one to call on. No network existed to support them. There was another difference, this one about how we created new things. If you look at Neanderthal stone tools across their entire 300,000-year history, something strange stands out. They barely changed. The same basic techniques, roughly the same shapes.
Generation after generation, people made tools almost exactly as their distant ancestors did. Tools made by Homo sapiens, by contrast, kept evolving. New methods appeared and spread. One invention became the foundation for the next. Stone points got smaller and thinner. Bone and antler were worked in increasingly diverse ways. Composite tools made from multiple connected pieces emerged. Some researchers call this the ratchet effect. Each generation builds on what came before, and improvements accumulate over time. Technology develops not from one genius, but through countless small refinements made by enormous numbers of people across millennia. Neanderthals appear not to have had this mechanism. Not because they were stupid, but perhaps because small, disconnected groups couldn't sustain the same long-term accumulation of innovation. For ideas to spread, you need a large enough population. For improvements to stack up, you need many people. A brilliant Neanderthal inventor might create something remarkable, but without a network to transmit discoveries to others, that knowledge died with him. We had the numbers, we had the connections, we had this ratchet mechanism, and we possessed one more ability that may have mattered even more. We could throw things with extraordinary precision. I know, this sounds absurd. Could throwing really have been the key to human dominance? But stay with me. The wooden spears Neanderthals made in Schoningen and elsewhere were designed for thrusting. They were heavy enough to drive into a large animal from close range. It was effective, but terribly dangerous for the hunter. You had to get right up next to a mammoth, a bison, or a cave bear. One mistake and you died. Homo sapiens created true projectile weapons. Lighter spears for throwing, spear throwers that amplified the power of the arm, and later bows and arrows. These let us kill from a distance and drastically reduced the danger of hunting massive animals. The bones tell this story. Neanderthal skeletons show countless healed fractures, especially in the upper body. Their pattern resembles injuries to rodeo participants, people thrown repeatedly by huge, enraged animals. Neanderthals regularly grappled with enormous beasts at close range and paid dearly for it. Homo sapiens skeletons show fewer such injuries. We killed from a distance. We suffered fewer wounds, lost fewer hunters to accidents, so more adults stayed alive. More accumulated knowledge survived, and the network supported more people capable of passing innovations forward. Everything was connected. Connections accelerated invention.
Those inventions improved weapons. Better weapons meant fewer losses. More population growth expanded connections further. Neanderthals barely had a chance, and yet they held on far longer than all these disadvantages might suggest. For thousands of years after Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, both species lived at the same time, sometimes in the same regions, even in the same valley, separated by just a few generations of settlements. The end didn't come suddenly. It was slow decline, gradual retreat to the margins. Neanderthal groups shrank and split apart, while modern human populations grew and spread out. The last Neanderthals clung to the south, to the Iberian Peninsula. These same Mediterranean shelters that had protected them during earlier cold spells offered refuge. But this time, recovery never came. When conditions improved, they didn't return north. The lands where they retreated became their graves. Their final refuge was Gibraltar. This rocky peninsula sits at the southern tip of Spain, just 14 kilometers from Africa across a narrow strait. Here, their story ended. Gorham's Cave lies at the base of the enormous limestone rock of Gibraltar. For tens of thousands of years, Neanderthals returned to this shelter again and again, generation after generation. They left hearths where they cooked food, stone tools, and butchered animal bones. The traces of daily life accumulated in layers that archaeologists read like pages of an incredibly long book. The latest Neanderthal layers in Gorham's Cave date to roughly 32,000 years ago, possibly even younger. Some disputed dates suggest Neanderthals were still there 28,000 years ago. If so, that was their last sight on all of Earth. Picture a small group huddled in a cave at the very edge of the continent, the last members of their species. Behind them, all of Europe was already occupied by newcomers. Ahead, only sea. Did they know they were the last? Did they understand that from a people who had dominated Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, only a handful remained? Did stories survive about the vast lands where their ancestors once roamed? Or had so much been lost that this cave on the rock seemed to them like the entire world? We don't know. Bones won't tell us what they felt as their numbers shrank with each generation. Tools won't show us if they understood what was happening. Archaeology only confirms that the last Neanderthals remained themselves until the very end. They kept hunting, making tools, and living as their ancestors had for millennia. They didn't become pathetic remnants of a once great people. They were Neanderthals to the end. Evidence of marine resources was found in the cave: mollusk shells, fish, and seal bones. Pushed to the very edge, the Gibraltar Neanderthals added more coastal food to their diet. They kept innovating, responding to circumstances, refusing simply to surrender and die. At the very end, they lit fires, ate monk seals, and looked across the strait toward the African shore. Maybe they wondered if there was anywhere left to go. Maybe they never thought about it at all. They simply lived each day as their people always had. Then it was over. The hearths went cold. Tools stopped appearing in the layers of sediment. Neanderthals left Gorham's Cave for the last time and never came back. After that, for about 30,000 years, only Homo sapiens walked the earth. The entire planet belonged to us. The last branches of humanity that had split off from each other over the previous million years had vanished. Only we remained. At least, that's what we thought. Then came an unexpected turn. In 2010, researchers announced the decoding of DNA from another ancient human species, whose existence no one had suspected until scientists studied a finger bone fragment from a Siberian cave. These were the Denisovans. An entire branch of humanity lived across Asia at the same time as both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. This species is known to us almost entirely through DNA, because their remains are so fragmentary that we can barely imagine what they looked like. Just as with Neanderthals, modern humans carry Denisovan DNA, especially people from Southeast Asia and Oceania. In some populations, Denisovan ancestry makes up to 5%. Our ancestors interbred with them. History turned out to be far more complex than anyone imagined. It involved not just Neanderthals and modern humans, but Denisovans too, and perhaps other groups yet to be discovered. Over hundreds of thousands of years, different peoples met, mixed, and parted again, forming a tangled web. We are not pure descendants of a single line. We are hybrids. We carry genetic material from several human species,
each arriving at this moment through its own path. Neanderthals are part of this heritage.
Not merely as a curious footnote, but as true ancestors. Their blood flows in our veins, their genes shape our bodies, their history became our history, even if we only recently learned to read it. Perhaps that's what matters most about the story of how Neanderthals survived the Ice Age. They didn't just survive it, they mastered it. They created technologies, strategies, and possibly even beliefs that let them thrive in conditions that would have destroyed most species. And when they finally disappeared, they didn't go completely extinct. They became part of us. They dissolved into the growing population of modern humans. They contributed to what we ultimately became. When your body fights off an infection, Neanderthal genes might help you. When your skin reacts to cold, it may reflect traces of their ancient adaptations. They continue to live in a way they could never have imagined, in billions of people spread across a planet that Neanderthals never saw in its entirety. This isn't quite extinction, it's transformation, another form of evolution. The story of Neanderthals continues forever inside the story of humanity. And now, here's something that might surprise you. Everyone knows the classic features of Neanderthals: heavy brow ridges and a sloping forehead, an enormous face jutting forward. These traits weren't ancient and original, they appeared later. They formed through evolution. Early Neanderthals actually looked more modern than the later ones. When you compare a Neanderthal from 300,000 years ago with one who lived 40,000 years ago, the earlier individual had a flatter face, less pronounced brow ridges, and skull features closer to ours. Over time, Neanderthal faces became increasingly distinctive rather than moving toward our appearance. They drifted away from that original template, while we stayed comparatively close. So when people call Neanderthals primitive based on looks, they've got it backwards. Those exaggerated, heavy features weren't signs of backwardness. They were the product of hundreds of thousands of years of specialized evolution. They were sophisticated, just in their own direction. What drove such dramatic facial changes? We don't have a definitive answer, but diet probably played a role. Neanderthals used their front teeth as tools, clamping down with tremendous force on animal hides and materials. Repeated strain like that across generations could have selected for larger, more robust facial structures. Climate likely contributed too. The frigid air they needed to warm might have altered how their nasal passages and sinuses developed. Whatever the reason, the outcome is clear. By the later period, Neanderthals had become highly specialized creatures, adapted to a very specific way of life in very specific conditions. For a long time, that specialization served them brilliantly. Then, it didn't. There's a lesson hidden here about the risks of becoming too perfectly matched to your environment. The very traits that make a species ideal for one setting can become liabilities when circumstances shift. When the ground shifts beneath your feet, flexibility and broad connections sometimes matter more than any single ability. Neanderthals hunted mammoths with thrusting spears. They endured winters that would have killed us within days. They made fire, crafted sophisticated tools, possibly decorated caves, and definitely buried their dead with what looked like respect. But they couldn't build the vast, interconnected societies that modern humans created. They couldn't accumulate innovations and spread them across thousands of people and hundreds of miles. During crises, they couldn't call on distant allies for help. In the end, these differences proved more important than all their power, skill, and cold weather adaptation combined. Around 40,000 years ago, temperatures began swinging wildly.
Warm periods suddenly gave way to deep freezes. Forests expanded and contracted. Animal populations became unpredictable. Chaos arrived, and in chaos, networks of connection consistently beat isolation. Neanderthals in Gibraltar watched the world transform and did what they always had: adapted in place, hunted available prey, and retreated when necessary. But there was nowhere left to retreat to. No unexplored lands lay beyond the horizon, no distant relatives to join and rebuild with. Only the ocean faced them, and across the water lay Africa, where modern humans had come from and where both lineages had begun hundreds of thousands of years earlier. On clear days, they might have looked across the strait and seen Morocco's mountains in the distance. Just a few hours by boat if they'd known how to build one. But they didn't. The water became an insurmountable barrier. So they stayed in the caves, continued living, and gradually vanished. Archaeology reveals no signs of violence at the end, no dramatic final battle, just slow decline.
Each successive layer holds fewer artifacts. Gaps between occupation periods grew longer, until eventually nothing remained. 30,000 years of silence followed, until archaeologists arrived with trowels, brushes, and precise measurements to read a story written in stone, bone, and clay. What an extraordinary story it turned out to be. This wasn't a tale of stupid savages lumbering toward inevitable extinction, but a saga of a remarkable people who conquered one of Earth's harshest environments and held on to it far longer than our species has even existed. They deserved a better ending, but endings rarely come with justice. What's strangest is that we keep finding them and learning facts that overturn what we thought we knew. Just when scientists believed they'd finally cracked Neanderthal history, a new discovery forces them to start over. New sites, new bones, new methods let us extract information from fragments that would have seemed worthless just 10 years ago. Dead for 30,000 years, yet their secrets continue emerging, drop by drop, discovery by discovery. Some of these findings are genuinely startling. Take the question of diet. Earlier, I mentioned that Neanderthals were committed carnivores, apex predators, basically wolves with spears. That's true. Chemical analysis of bones confirms it beyond reasonable doubt. But a problem emerged. When researchers examined nitrogen levels in Neanderthal bones, they found something strange. The measurements were off the charts, higher than wolves, hyenas, or any predator ever tested. Nitrogen levels show where an animal sits in the food chain. Plants have little, herbivores eating plants have slightly more, and carnivores eating herbivores have more still. The highest levels appear in carnivores that eat other carnivores. So what were Neanderthals consuming if their nitrogen was so extraordinarily high? They weren't hunting lions or eating wolves. The numbers made no sense. For years, this mystery frustrated researchers with no solution in sight. Then someone proposed such a strange theory it might actually be correct. Fly larvae. Yes, you heard that right. A study published in 2025 suggested that extremely high nitrogen levels might have come from eating meat that had been stored long enough to develop maggots. In other words, Neanderthals might have hung meat until it reeked, then eaten it along with the larva. Sounds disgusting, doesn't it? But think about it. You've just killed a mammoth. There's far more meat than your group can eat fresh. You have two choices. Let it rot and waste precious protein, or find a way to preserve the kill and stretch your calorie supply across weeks instead of days. Many traditional peoples around the world ate aged meat together with the larvae that appeared in it. Actually, it's quite an efficient way to extract every possible calorie from a kill. nothing goes to waste. The larvae themselves are rich in protein and fat, and fermentation might even make some nutrients more accessible. Did Neanderthals actually do this? We can't prove it yet, but the nitrogen levels fit the hypothesis. It also explains how small groups survived where large game was scarce and every calorie mattered. Speaking of survival, there's another question we're only beginning to understand. How did Neanderthal children grow up? Their childhood was nothing like ours. By studying teeth from young individuals, researchers uncovered growth patterns that tell a remarkable story. Neanderthal kids matured fast, genuinely fast. Their teeth developed quicker than ours, and their bodies reached adulthood earlier. A teenage Neanderthal was probably physically mature at an age when modern children still attend middle school. Why the rush? Likely because the world didn't allow them the luxury of a long childhood. Every winter meant fighting for survival. Every hunt was a test. The sooner someone could contribute to the group, the better their odds of making it. Modern humans took a different path. We extended childhood and gave young people more time to learn and absorb knowledge accumulated by previous generations. In some ways, this is riskier because kids stay dependent longer, consuming resources and offering little in return. But it gave them time to master complex skills and internalize cultural knowledge built up over generations. Maybe this is another piece of the puzzle about why we're here and they're gone. Our children had longer to learn, absorb innovations, and develop the social networks that gave us advantages. Neanderthal children had to grow up fast and get to work. Neither strategy is inherently superior, they just fit different circumstances. In the brutal Europe of ice ages, where adult strength determined whether a group ate or starved, the Neanderthal way made sense. But when conditions shifted, it might have reduced their ability to adapt.
Now comes a question that always comes up when discussing Neanderthals. Could they speak? Did they have language? This drives scientists crazy because we can't go back and hear their voices. We have to rely on indirect evidence, and unfortunately, it's maddeningly ambiguous. There's anatomy first. For years, researchers pointed to where the larynx sat in Neanderthals as proof they couldn't produce the full range of human sounds. The throat structure seemed unsuited for complex speech. Then a Neanderthal hyoid bone was found. This small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat supports the tongue and helps form speech sounds. What did they discover? It was nearly identical to ours. Same shape, same structure, same muscle attachment points. This doesn't prove Neanderthals talked, but it removes one major anatomical argument against the possibility. Then there's genetic evidence. Neanderthals had the FOXP2 gene variant linked to language ability in modern humans. Damage to this gene causes severe speech disorders. Neanderthals carried the same functioning version we do. Again, not proof, but another hint the capability existed. Finally, there's the behavioral evidence I mentioned earlier. Coordinated group hunts, sophisticated tool-making traditions passed down through generations, symbolic acts like wearing ornaments and burying the dead with apparent ceremony. All of this seems to require some way to communicate complex ideas. Could they have had philosophical discussions? Probably not in any way we'd recognize. But could they coordinate a mammoth hunt? Teach a child how to make a proper spear? Indicate where good hunting grounds and water sources were? Or tell stories about ancestors and spirits? I think so. Their speech probably lacked the grammatical complexity we're used to, but some form of communication existed,
and was developed enough to preserve culture across hundreds of thousands of years. Since we're discussing Neanderthal abilities, let's talk about their physical strength. Honestly, in any contest of raw power, modern humans would be completely outmatched. The evidence is written in their bones, the muscle attachment sites, the enormous ridges and protrusions where powerful muscle fastened. Their arms generated strength far beyond what any current athlete could produce, and their grip would make a professional wrestler feel like a child. One researcher suggested that the average Neanderthal woman was probably stronger than nearly any man alive today. Not stronger than Olympic weightlifters after years of training, but stronger than almost every ordinary man. And this was natural Neanderthal strength without specialized preparation. We're not talking about bulging bodybuilder muscles, but genuine, practical power hardwired into them from birth. That kind of physical power became essential when survival meant grappling with deadly predators and hauling carcasses across frozen terrain. Their skeletal structure was fundamentally different, denser, thicker, more resilient than ours. These bodies were engineered to withstand the extreme stresses of existence without modern conveniences or domesticated animals to lighten the burden. When Neanderthals crept close to massive bison, woolly mammoths, or cave bears with thrust spears in hand, they needed every ounce of that strength. A single miscalculation could mean horns through the ribs or a crushing blow from powerful jaws. Only through raw power and lightning-quick reflexes could they survive long enough to reproduce. The skeletal record tells a story of relentless danger. Healed fractures appear everywhere, particularly on the skull and upper body, bearing the unmistakable pattern of creatures locked in close combat with enraged megafauna. They were thrown to the ground, trampled beneath hooves, and gored by horns. Yet they survived through sheer resilience, rising again to face the same ordeal. This lifestyle exacted an enormous toll. Neanderthals rarely reached 40 years of age. The cause wasn't genetic limitation, but accumulated trauma from decades of violent physical extremity. Their bodies were remarkable machines, but even the finest machinery wears down over time. Now consider their minds. Brain size alone reveals only part of the story. Neanderthal brains were indeed somewhat larger by volume than ours, surpassing modern human brain cases in raw capacity. For decades, this fact was dismissed as evidence that bigger brains meant nothing, or worse, that Neanderthals remained intellectually inferior despite their cranial size. Reality is more nuanced. Architecture matters as much as dimensions. Their brains were wired differently. Vision and motor control claimed proportionally more neural real estate than in us. This makes perfect sense. Tracking prey across vast expanses demanded exceptional eyesight, while hunting and survival depended on extraordinarily fine movement control. Evolution had channeled neural resources where they needed to go. Our brains developed along a different path. Modern humans possess relatively larger areas devoted to understanding social dynamics and processing language. We gained a biological foundation capable of managing vast social networks, handling intricate linguistic information, and retaining knowledge of relationships and alliances within numerous interacting groups. Neither arrangement was inherently superior. Each was optimized for its ecological niche. The Neanderthal mind was tuned for small group survival in an unforgiving world. Our mind adapted to complicated social arrangements with constantly shifting relationships. Yet, dismiss the idea that Neanderthals couldn't handle complexity. Evidence contradicts this completely. Consider their stone tools, which I mentioned earlier but deserve deeper exploration. Creating even a single implement demanded far more than picking up a rock and smashing it against another until something sharp broke off. Neanderthals employed what researchers call prepared core technology. They would select a large, high-quality stone block, ideally flint, though other available materials worked too. They then carefully shaped this blank across its entire surface, detaching small flakes in precise sequences. The actual tool didn't emerge yet. The artisan was preparing the core, carefully sculpting it so that a final, perfectly calculated strike would remove one single ideal flake of exactly the right shape and size. This preparation could demand dozens of meticulously calibrated blows. Each strike had to be flawless. A hit too forceful would shatter the core. A slightly wrong angle produced a misshapen result. With every strike, the craftsperson had to read the stone, understand its internal structure, and predict how the impact would travel through the material. Here's what makes this remarkable. You can't see inside stone. It must be felt, understood, and known through accumulated experience. Modern researchers attempting to replicate Neanderthal tools spend years mastering the craft. Many never achieve genuine proficiency. These weren't simple, universal skills. They required serious cognitive ability and extraordinary hand-eye coordination. So, when Neanderthals get labeled primitive or stupid simply because they left no cave paintings or bone flutes, one feels inclined to hand such a critic a piece of flint and ask them to demonstrate their competence. They'd almost certainly produce useless junk, while a Neanderthal child, after a few lessons, would outperform them. Here's another intriguing question researchers are only beginning to untangle. Neanderthal genes surviving in modern human DNA may still be influencing our brain function today. Some studies suggest certain genetic variants affect how carriers' brains develop and wire themselves. Sometimes the changes are subtle, slightly different proportions in certain regions or variations in neural connections. We're still learning what these mean, but investigation continues. Other Neanderthal genes have more obvious health implications. In a world of constant wounds, variants that made blood clot more readily were advantageous, helping stop bleeding quickly. In today's world, where sharp horns rarely puncture our bodies, those same variants simply increase stroke and heart attack risk. Neanderthal genetic versions linked to depression, certain autoimmune conditions, and skin responses to sunlight also circulate in our genome. Researchers have even found connections to pain perception and medication response. These findings are still being understood for medical significance, yet one thing is clear already. That mixing event, occurring more than 40,000 years ago, didn't remain distant history. It's directly shaping human health and biology right now. Perhaps one day, a physician will need to consider your Neanderthal inheritance to prescribe the most effective treatment. This leads to an uncomfortable question many prefer to avoid. If Neanderthal genes create problems in modern people, should we try to fix them? Should we use genetic technology to remove variants that increase disease risk? The flip side is equally fascinating. Should we attempt to bring Neanderthals back? We possess their DNA. Our genetic engineering tools grow increasingly sophisticated. Some scientists have genuinely proposed reconstructing the Neanderthal genome
and using it to create living individuals, not through cloning, as in Jurassic Park, but through gradual modification of human cells, until the result is essentially a Neanderthal being. Is this a good idea? Would it be ethical? What rights would such a creature possess? Would it be considered human or something else? These have stopped being merely science fiction questions. Technology moves so fast, but within a few decades, we might genuinely face such a choice.
Our decision would reveal much about who we are and how we regard our extinct relatives. For now, we must learn from what they left behind: bones, tools, food residue, hearth ashes, and traces of existence across tens of thousands of years before writing existed. Each new discovery adds another piece to the complete picture. Every analysis reveals previously unknown details, yet all research consistently circles back to one question: the mystery that haunts everyone studying ancient humans. What did they think about us? We constantly ask ourselves what our ancestors truly believed about them. Did they see rivals, competitors, or possible partners? How did they displace them? Why did they alone survive? But almost nobody flips the question around. Nobody asks what it looked like from their perspective. What did Neanderthals feel when strange, thin people from the south began appearing in their world? What went through their minds as their territories compressed, their numbers declined, and everything familiar began disappearing? Sometimes this question keeps me awake. Picture a moment. Somewhere in Europe, perhaps 45,000 years ago, a band of modern humans pushes north through a river valley, discovering new territory and hunting horses across unfamiliar grasslands. Their journey spans countless generations. Their ancestors departed Africa, crossed the Middle East, and now found themselves in this frigid, alien land. Then they notice figures on a ridge. They resemble people, yet something is distinctly different. The physiology moves differently, and the eyes betray unmistakable intelligence. What happened next? Did they wave, then retreat? Did one raise a weapon while the other extended an empty hand in peace? We'll never know, but such moments genuinely occurred hundreds of times over millennia as two species encountered each other across Eurasia. Yet almost no one wonders what Neanderthals thought upon seeing us. Their ancestors had controlled Europe for 300,000 years. Countless generations had walked these valleys and hunted these herds long before any surviving memory. This was their world. Then we arrived. Peculiar, slender people from nowhere. They made unfamiliar sounds, used different tools, and traveled in such vast numbers they spread across the land like a gradual flood. What ran through Neanderthal minds, watching our expansion year after year, seeing herds shrink steadily smaller? What did they feel discovering their hunting grounds now occupied by strangers who showed no intention of leaving? Did they fight back? Did some groups attempt peace while others chose conflict? Did elders convene to deliberate on the response? Did parents embrace their children at night, wondering what world awaited them? All this vanished into silence. We recovered their bones, but not their stories, their tools, but not their fears, their genes, but not their dreams. This is what extinction truly means. Not merely death, but complete erasure, an entire universe of experience dissolved and forgotten. The history becomes stranger still. The more we discover about Neanderthals, the more we learn about ourselves.
certain findings completely overturn our understanding of human evolution. Consider a skull excavated in Germany in 1933 near the city of Steinheim, roughly 300 kilometers south of where the Schöningen spears were found. Workers pulled it from a gravel quarry, and nobody knew how to classify it. The Steinheim skull remains one of the most perplexing fossils in the entire human family tree. Dating between 250 and 350,000 years old, it seems unable to commit to any single species. On one side, a large protrusion on the back of the skull called the occipital bun appears, a classic Neanderthal marker present on nearly every recovered specimen. Yet examining the face reveals something doesn't align. It's flatter and more refined than expected, bearing stronger resemblance to a modern human face. Scientists debated this specimen for decades. Some called it an early Neanderthal, others identified it as Heidelberg man, supposedly our ancestor. A few even proposed creating an entirely new species just for this one skull. Then came the recent analysis that stunned me when I first encountered it. The Steinheim skull may show what Neanderthals looked like before they acquired their final distinctive characteristics. It's like a snapshot of evolution in progress. Remember those heavy brow ridges, the projecting face, the sloping forehead? We typically consider these primitive traits, evidence of ancient heritage proving Neanderthals were less developed than us. This assumption is entirely wrong. Such features emerged gradually over time. Early Neanderthals had flatter faces, less prominent brows, and skulls that resembled ours much more closely.
Over the course of 300,000 years, their faces became increasingly unusual. They were moving away from that original appearance, while we maintained greater similarity to it. So when people call Neanderthals primitive because of their looks, they're actually understanding things backwards. Their exaggerated, massive features weren't crude. They were developed and specialized, shaped over hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to a particular way of life. This leads to an even stranger conclusion. An ancient fossil species known as Homo antecessor, which lived roughly 800,000 years ago, had a face that looks surprisingly modern, almost like ours. This suggests that the modern human face might actually be very ancient, appearing and disappearing multiple times throughout our evolutionary history. We didn't acquire our modern face, we retained it. The Neanderthals were the ones who changed. But then the story gets more complicated, because each new ancient genome we decode transforms what seemed like a clear family tree into an increasingly tangled mess. In 2010, scientists announced they'd extracted DNA from a tiny finger bone discovered in the Denisova cave in Siberia. Everyone expected it belonged to a Neanderthal. The cave had yielded Neanderthal tools, and there were known Neanderthal settlements nearby. But the DNA told a different story. It was something entirely new, a whole branch of the human family tree that nobody knew existed. Named after the cave where it was found, they called them the Denisovans. We still barely understand what they looked like, because almost everything scientists have is DNA. But that DNA reveals that the Denisovans lived throughout Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, existing simultaneously with both Neanderthals and us. Our ancestors interbred with them as well. In modern populations of Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, Denisovan DNA makes up as much as 5% of the genome. That's actually more Denisovan heritage than most people carry from Neanderthals. This wasn't about chance encounters. It points to sustained contact between multiple human species
over thousands of years. But it gets even more complex. Within the Denisovan genome, scientists found traces of DNA from yet another unknown group, one that split from the human family tree over 1 million years ago. This is a phantom lineage. We've never found any bones from them.
We know they existed only because echoes of their DNA survive inside the Denisovans who interbred with them. How many human species existed? How many branches of the family tree vanished into time? How many encounters between different peoples happened in deep antiquity but remained forever unknown? The old picture of human evolution was simple, a straight line from apes to us, with each new species replacing the previous one. Clean, understandable, and wrong. The reality before us is a tangled bush. Branches split apart, come together, and separate again. Populations meet, mingle, and drift away from each other. Genes pass between groups that scientists once thought were completely separate species. We're not the product of a single line. We're a new combination of old pieces. Several human branches merged within us after millennia of interbreeding. And here's why this matters to you personally. Ancient genes aren't just a curious detail. They're active, they're working, and right now they're performing tasks in your body. There's a Neanderthal variant of a gene that affects how your immune system recognizes certain viruses. If you carry it, your response to infection might differ from someone without that variant. Other versions influence blood clotting, pain perception, and how your skin responds to sunlight. Some are connected to depression, autoimmune diseases, and even how your body processes certain medications. Doctors are beginning to understand that when choosing treatment, they might need to account for their patient's Neanderthal heritage. An interbreeding event that happened 47,000 years ago could determine which drug works best for you today. This isn't ancient history, it's part of your medical record. And the influence of these genes extends beyond health. Research shows that Neanderthal variants affect brain development, the shape of specific brain regions, and how nerve cells connect. We don't yet understand the full significance, but the findings are intriguing. Neanderthal DNA is doing something inside our brains. When you think about anything at all, a tiny part of the machinery behind that thought might be inherited from people who died 30,000 years before writing was invented. If you sit with that thought long enough, it becomes genuinely unsettling. Or maybe it's beautiful. Perhaps both at once. Science could talk about this forever. Discoveries arrive faster than we can absorb them. Every year brings new sights, bones, genomes, and revelations. The story of Neanderthals that scientists tell today looks nothing like the version from a decade ago, and in another decade it will change again. But I keep coming back to one thought. Right now, somewhere in a museum storage vault, there might be a bone, a tooth, or a skull fragment that nobody knows about, pulled from the ground decades ago, catalogued, filed away, and forgotten. And inside it, thanks to a chemical miracle, DNA has survived. It's damaged but still readable, waiting for the right technology to appear. What will it tell us? What species does it belong to? What story is locked inside these ancient molecules? Maybe it's nothing special. But maybe it's another Denisovan. Maybe it's a member of one of those phantom lineages we can see in the genetics but have never found in the fossil record. Or maybe it's something completely unknown, something that will force us to redraw the family tree all over again. The past doesn't stay fixed. It changes as we learn to ask better questions.
Neanderthals have been dead for 30,000 years, but we still don't know who they were and, because of them, who we became. Because here's the thing to remember. Hold on to this when you're done listening. Every human being with ancestors outside Africa carries Neanderthal DNA, between 1 and 4% of their genome, depending on their background. On the surface, that sounds like very little. But consider this. The human genome contains roughly 20,000 genes. 1% means 200 genes. 200 pieces of genetic code that came from a different human species. These genes survived the end of their world. They crossed the boundary between them and us. They've persisted through thousands of generations. Right now, they're in your cells, wrapped up in chromosomes and copied every time your body creates new tissue. They've been passed from parents to children, from parents to children, ever since the last Neanderthal walked the earth. That's an unbroken chain of inheritance spanning 40,000 years. Neanderthals didn't completely disappear. They merged with us and dissolved into our population. Their species vanished, but their genes survived inside another species that continued the journey. It wasn't extinction, it was transformation. One story ended, another continued, weaving the old story into itself. You carry those woven threads. Every listener holds their own version of this inheritance. Immune genes that help fight infection, variants that shaped your brain, and ancient code that makes you slightly different from what you'd be without that distant mixing. Neanderthals hunted mammoths in the shadow of glaciers and created fire 400,000 years ago. They wore bear hides and eagle talons, possibly painted caves, and almost certainly buried their dead with something like love. And then they were gone. But not entirely. Not forever. The last Neanderthal didn't die in a Gibraltar cave 30,000 years ago. The last Neanderthal is reading these words right now. The last Neanderthal is you.